Jalen gripped his backpack tighter as the professor scanned the room, then smirked. You, he said, pointing straight at him. Solve this, since you clearly think you deserve that seat. The entire lecture hall turned, eyes burning holes into Jalen's skin. On the board, a graduate-level equation no freshman should ever see. But as Jalen stepped forward, chalk in hand, the professor's cruel trap began to unravel. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall at Ashbridge University was built like a Roman amphitheater, designed to elevate power. Tiered rows of polished mahogany desks overlooked a single center stage, where professors were modern-day gladiators, armed with chalk and ego. Jalen Cross had never felt smaller. He stepped in slowly, clutching his worn canvas backpack close to his chest. He scanned the room not for a seat, but for a shadow to hide in. A place where he could just listen, just learn, without being seen. He had always been like that, quiet, observant, disarming in his silence. But Ashbridge was different. Here, silence got noticed. He took a spot in the back corner, behind a column where half the whiteboard was obscured. He liked it that way. The less they saw of him, the less they could assume. Whispers floated past him like mosquitoes. Who's the transfer kid? Did he get in through the urban scholar track? He looks lost. He had expected the stares. What he didn't expect was how loud they made him feel. As if every glance, every quick snicker, was a spotlight. Ashbridge wasn't built for kids like him, at least not in this department. Engineering maybe. Football, sure, but Calculus 3 with Dr. Peter Landon, that was legacy territory. Landon entered the room with a slow, theatrical pace, his footsteps precise, like punctuation marks. Tall, gray-haired and smug, he wore the kind of suit that said tenure came with perks. He didn't carry notes. He didn't need to. Instead, he picked up a piece of chalk and began writing on the board without introduction. The squeaking sound filled the hall like a siren, demanding attention. Lines, variables, integrals. He scrawled until the board looked more like an abstract painting than a math problem. Welcome to Calculus 3, he said finally, turning around. Some of you won't last. That's not an insult. It's just statistics. He smiled. But statistics, like people, can be manipulated. The class laughed lightly. Jalen didn't. Dr. Landon went on, dissecting the problem he'd written, breaking it down piece by piece with mechanical precision. He didn't speak to the class so much as perform for it, like a magician unveiling a trick that no one else could possibly replicate. And that was the point. Then, without warning, he stopped mid-sentence and turned toward the back of the room. His eyes scanned the rows, slowly, deliberately. Let's see if our new additions can keep up, he said with mock curiosity. Jalen froze. He knew what was coming before it even happened. You in the back, Landon said, pointing with the chalk like a dagger. Yes, you, hoodie, backpack still on. What's your name? Jalen swallowed hard. Jalen Cross. Well, Mr. Cross, let's test your grasp of the fundamentals. He turned back to the board and added a new set of variables to the already complex equation, making it even more tangled. Students began to shift in their seats. A few turned to look at Jalen. A few smiled. This is a classic multivariable optimization problem, Landon said. No notes. No help. Go ahead. Solve it. Silence. Jalen stood up slowly. The room wasn't just watching him. It was waiting for him to fail. That was the unspoken expectation. This wasn't a real question. It was a performance trap. A test designed not to assess knowledge, but to establish dominance. Jalen had seen this before. Not in classrooms, but in grocery stores, in job interviews, in moments when people thought they were being subtle but weren't. Moments when they wanted to remind him, you're not supposed to be here. He walked down the steps slowly, each footfall echoing louder than the last. He didn't look at Landon, didn't look at the sea of eyes on him. He looked at the equation. It was hard, deliberately so. A mixture of partial derivatives, boundary constraints, and a curve that looped irrationally, but Jalen didn't panic. He breathed. Math, unlike people, didn't lie. It didn't judge. It didn't care where you were from, or what you looked like, or whether your mom worked nights cleaning hotel rooms. Math just was, cold, pure, fair. He picked up the chalk. As he began writing, the room fell quieter. His hands moved with a confidence that betrayed his heartbeat. First he isolated the constraint. Then he reparameterized the curve. Landon stepped slightly closer. Arms crossed. Lines began to form on the board that even some seniors struggled to recognize. A few students leaned forward. One TA scribbled something in their notebook. But then the chalk snapped in his hand. He froze. The sound rang out like a gunshot. A few students chuckled. Landon raised an eyebrow, almost smiling. Jalen knelt down, picked up the smaller piece, and kept going. Every step of the solution pulled him deeper. Not just into the math, but into himself. Into every night he'd studied at the bus stop because the library closed early. Every time a teacher assumed he'd cheated because his answer was too good. Every friend who told him to stick to sports because math's not for us. He wrote and rewrote, corrected himself once, then kept going. When he finally stopped, there was nothing left to solve. Complete, he stepped back. The board was covered in a tangle of numbers and logic, but it made sense. Elegant. Even. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked at Landon. The professor stood there, studying the board, stone-faced. He said nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then he walked over, took the chalk, and underlined the final answer. "That's correct," he said flatly. "Surprising." The room erupted, not in applause but in murmurs. Confusion. A few students were impressed. A few were annoyed. A few weren't sure what they felt. Jalen turned to walk back to his seat. But just as he reached the stairs, Landon's voice called out again. "One more thing, Mr. Cross." Jalen turned. Landon smiled, this time with teeth. "Office hours. Today, 4 sharp. Don't be late." And with that he turned his back and began erasing the board. Jalen stood frozen at the foot of the stairs. The tension had shifted, but not dissolved. Something about Landon's smile didn't sit right. It wasn't approval. It was challenge. He knew now. Solving the problem hadn't earned him respect. It had started a war. As the bell rang and students poured out, Jalen noticed something etched lightly on his desk. Something that hadn't been there when he sat down. It read, "You showed off. Now you're a target." Jalen Cross sat in the cafeteria with his tray untouched, hands still dusted faintly with chalk. He stared past the crowd, not really seeing anyone. His mind was stuck in the lecture hall, frozen on the image of that message, carved into the desk. "You showed off. Now you're a target." But before Ashbridge University, before the ancient amphitheater-style rooms and $1,000 textbooks, Jalen had already been a target for most of his life. He didn't come from a prep school. There were no framed certificates or varsity jackets in his mother's small apartment on the south side of Milwaukee. Just the cracked white walls of a one-bedroom that somehow held a boy, a woman, and the relentless noise of survival. Rent was late, more often than it wasn't. Food stamps sometimes stretched, sometimes didn't. But math always added up. Jalen's mother, Charisse, worked nights at a convalescent hospital, and mornings cleaning for a downtown real estate office. She never finished high school. What she lacked in formal education, she made up for in grit. "You don't gotta be loud to be smart," she'd say, folding towels and looking him in the eye. "Just be so good they can't ignore you, even when they want to." His first brush with mathematics came not in a classroom, but at a kitchen table beneath a flickering ceiling light. He was 8 when he started solving the crossword-style puzzles she brought home from the back of the newspaper. By 10 he was doing mental multiplication faster than most calculators. But teachers rarely noticed. And when they did, they questioned it. "There's no way he got this answer without help," one 7th grade teacher wrote in red ink. "Retest required." Jalen took the retest. Got it right again. Still, the counselor suggested he focus on vocational paths instead of academics. Jalen remembered every syllable of that meeting. Not because of what was said, but because of the look in his mother's eyes. Rage, buried beneath a worn-out calm. "No one sees him," she whispered on the bus ride home. "But they will." Years passed. Jalen didn't go to a regular high school. After a school suspension for a fight he didn't start, but refused to back down from, he was pushed into a continuation program. He earned his GED in a cramped building, attached to a strip mall, wedged between a pawn shop and a payday loan office. It was the kind of place people forgot existed, unless they needed to. But Jalen never forgot what Charisse had promised. "They'll see you." So when the guidance counselor at the GED Center slid an old flyer across the table, Ashbridge University Urban Scholars Summer Bridge Program, Jalen barely blinked. It was a long shot. Everyone said so. Ashbridge wasn't just selective. It was symbolic. It represented power. Generational wealth. Students with polished resumes and legacy surnames. But Jalen had something none of them had. Rage turned inward into discipline. He spent the summer immersed in online calculus courses, devouring YouTube lectures, annotating textbooks he borrowed from the local library. He wrote his essay, revised it 14 times. When the acceptance letter arrived, Charisse wept so hard she dropped the mail on the floor. "I told you," she whispered, holding his face in her hands. "I told you they'd see." But Ashbridge saw only what it wanted. Orientation weekend was a blur of fake smiles and thin applause. His urban scholar badge on his lanyard felt like a spotlight instead of an honor. Every conversation he overheard between legacy students confirmed it. "Did you see how many of them they brought in this year? I heard their math scores are curved anyway." Still, Jalen kept his head down. Until today, when he solved that board in front of Landon's class, something shifted. Not just in the room, but in himself. For the first time in a long time he felt seen. Not pitied, not tolerated. Seen. But visibility came with danger. After lunch, Jalen returned to his dorm to grab a folder for his next class. The hallway was empty, except for one student, an RA named Carson, who wore boat shoes, an Ashbridge hoodie, and a permanent smirk.
"Hey, you're the math guy, right?"
Carson asked, holding a takeout bag. Jalen nodded slowly. "Cool move in class. Just, be careful. Professor Landon doesn't like being wrong." "I wasn't trying to show him up." Carson laughed. "Doesn't matter. Around here, perception is reality." The warning hung in the air long after Carson walked away. Jalen arrived early for his second class of the day, linear algebra. Different professor, different building, same cold architecture that felt like it had been built without students in mind. Rows of laminated chairs with steel legs, a projector humming in the background. As students shuffled in, a TA placed a laminated seating chart on each table. Jalen scanned it. Something wasn't right. First row, Adkins, Bernard. Second row, Daniels, Goldstein, Harris. Back row, McKinney, O'Connell, Patel. He checked again. No cross. He flipped the sheet over. Still no cross. Confused, he raised his hand. The TA, a wiry woman with glasses sliding down her nose, approached. My name's not on the chart," Jalen said. She squinted. "Are you sure you're in the right class?" "Yeah. Math." She took the sheet from him, scanned it again, then said, Maybe a registration error. I'll check with admin later." The tone wasn't rude, but it was dismissive. As if he was probably mistaken. As if somehow it made more sense that he was in the wrong class than that they had made a mistake. He sat down anyway. As the professor began lecture, Jalen pulled out his notebook. But his thoughts spiraled. His name wasn't on the chart. Not even misspelled. Just missing. And then something struck him harder than any insult had ever done. The desk. Back in Landon's class. Hadn't he seen the same thing? After solving the problem, he'd returned to his seat. That's when he saw it. "You showed off. Now you're a target." It was etched with a fine tip, not scratch deep, but deliberate. What if this wasn't coincidence? What if it had started before today? His hands trembled slightly as he scribbled down the linear matrix the professor was diagramming. But he wasn't present anymore. His mind flashed back to orientation week, the way his housing had been accidentally reassigned. How he was the only black student in his dorm wing. How he didn't get the email about the honors math placement test, only finding out through a bulletin board flyer. Were these just errors? Or signals? Signals meant to remind him of his place, or that he had none here. He thought about calling his mother that night. But what would he say? "They'll see me, ma. They're already watching." As the professor dismissed class, Jalen gathered his things. But when he stood to leave, a folded note slipped out from under his notebook. It wasn't there when he arrived. He opened it slowly. One line, handwritten in shaky block letters. "Withdraw quietly, before you get erased." By the second week, Jalen could feel the room change before he even stepped inside it. People didn't look at him. They looked around him, as if he were something to avoid without being rude. Like a wet floor sign, or a roach on a clean tile. He heard it first in fragments. A white girl with pearl earrings whispering behind a textbook. A guy in a rugby jacket, nudging his friend and glancing over. A TA clearing his throat and moving on the second. Jalen raised his hand. There was no open hostility. No one called him a slur. No one shoved him in the hallway. Ashbridge was more refined than that. More subtle, more cruel. Because here racism wore a smile. Didn't know they were still letting in GH. Someone mumbled during group discussion. Hey, I heard they bumped 3 applicants to bring in a diversity push. Another one said. Not quite quietly enough. No one said it directly. That was the genius of it. They never had to. The message was clear. You didn't earn this. You were handed it. Professor Landon's challenge had gone viral within the school. Someone had posted a shaky phone recording to the campus message board, titled, "Kid Solves Impossible Problem, Makes Landon Blink." The views climbed fast. Jalen's name wasn't in the post, but everyone knew. A few students gave him reluctant nods in passing, but mostly it just amplified the pressure and the resentment. By Thursday, the video had been taken down, not because of content, but because of privacy concerns. Strangely, no one asked Jalen if he had privacy concerns when his back was turned to the camera. The university had said nothing. No congratulatory mention from the math department. No email. No invite to the Honors Math Society, which he now knew did exist, though no one had told him. When he tried to join a study group after class, the leader told him the group was already full, but then invited 2 new students the next day. Even the TA, Jacob, a curly-haired junior with nervous eyes, had shifted. He used to smile when passing Jalen in the hallway. Now he looked past him, gave monosyllabic replies, flinched when Jalen asked clarifying questions. Once Jalen overheard him talking to another student. I just think admissions should consider overall readiness, not just potential. Like being good at one test doesn't mean you're prepared for the rigor here. Prepared. As if Jalen hadn't read the same textbooks, watched the same lectures, solved problems until the sun rose. As if growing up with sirens outside his window instead of silence made him inherently less capable. It wasn't just academics. At the dining hall, people stopped sitting near him unless the tables were full. In group assignments, he was always the last to be paired. Once, he arrived early to claim a seat in the library's collaborative space, only to find a paper sign taped to the desk when he returned from the restroom. Reserved for Group 12. There was no Group 12. It began to wear on him in small, invisible ways. His sleep frayed. He stopped raising his hand in class. His notes became a mess of half-written equations and questions he was too tired to pursue. Worse, he started questioning himself. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was a mistake. Ashbridge had always felt like enemy territory. But now, it felt personal. That Friday, during a mandatory first-year seminar called Voices of the Modern University, a guest speaker stood in front of a PowerPoint that read Diversity Metrics, Progress or Tokenism. The irony was lost on no one. The speaker, a tenured professor from the political science department, walked through graphs showing enrollment by race, graduation by income bracket, and retention rates. One bar graph showed that only 6% of students were black. But that's up from 3% a decade ago, the professor said, smiling. So we're making strides. Jalen didn't smile. A hand went up in the back. What are the academic performance gaps between those groups? The professor paused. Well, those numbers are nuanced. Laughter. The questioner, a white male with thick glasses and a confident slouch, nodded. Just wondering if we're lowering standards to raise quotas. The professor laughed nervously. No. Of course not. Admissions is holistic. We look at potential, not just preparation. That word again. Potential. Jalen sat still, his hands clenched beneath the desk. After the session, as students filed out, someone bumped into him from behind. Not hard. Not enough to warrant alarm. Just enough to make him drop his notebook. He turned. It was the same guy from the question. The one with glasses. Oops, he said. Must have slipped. He didn't stop walking. Jalen bent down to gather his pages. Something white fluttered out from between the notebook's spine. A small envelope. He hadn't put anything there. He looked around. No one was watching. Everyone had moved on. He opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of ruled paper. The handwriting was blocky. The letters spaced deliberately. You don't belong here. No name. No signature. No threat. Just the sentence. He didn't show anyone. He didn't report it. There was nothing to prove. No video. No fingerprint. Just a message, like the one carved into his desk. Like the whispers behind him in every hallway. He folded the note back up. Slower this time. As if touching it too long would stain him. He wasn't surprised. What stunned him was how numb he felt reading it. He should have been angry. Outraged. maybe even scared. Instead, he just felt tired. That night, he sat at his dorm desk staring at the same problem set he used to love, but the numbers blurred together. He could hear his mom's voice on the phone from 2 nights ago. "Baby, don't let them make you small. You got a right to take up space." He wanted to believe her, but even the air at Ashbridge felt borrowed. The next morning, Jalen stopped by the math department office to check on a tutoring program he'd applied to join. The secretary looked confused, tapping her keyboard. "Strange," she said. "It says here your application was withdrawn yesterday." Monday came dressed in silence. Jalen walked the path to Dr. Landon's class, like a man returning to the scene of a quiet execution. Each step toward the building felt heavier than the last. There was no physical injury, no bruise or scrape, yet his body moved like it had endured a beating. No one else could see. He hadn't told anyone about the withdrawn tutoring application, not even his mom. What could he say? That someone was tampering with his opportunities, that invisible hands were pulling strings to make him doubt every accomplishment. There was no proof, just a growing list of small targeted erasures that left him feeling like a ghost haunting his own ambition. As he reached the double doors of the mathematics building, he paused. His reflection stared back at him. Tired eyes, drawn face, jaw clenched in a mix of defiance and fatigue. He'd been here before, not this campus, but this moment, this unspoken crossroad between letting it go or standing still and swallowing it whole. He walked in. The room was already half full when he arrived. Conversations hummed in low tones, snippets of weekend gossip, assignment deadlines, fantasy football. But when Jalen stepped down the amphitheater steps to his usual seat, a sudden hush fell, almost imperceptibly, like a glass of water slowly tipping. He sat. No one spoke to him. Dr. Landon entered precisely at 10 hours a.m., as usual, clipboard in one hand, black marker in the other. His expression was neutral, controlled. His pace was methodical, unfazed. He stood in front of the dry erase board, and without preamble began to write. Jalen knew from the first line that something was different. This wasn't the usual type of problem they'd been working on. This wasn't anything anyone had yet seen in this class. This was a monster. He recognized fragments of it. Lagrange multipliers, surface integrals, implicit function theorem, but the way it was constructed, it was layered, cruel in its complexity, not just advanced, beyond the syllabus, graduate-level mathematics. As Landon continued adding variables, the room began to shift in energy. Notebooks closed, eyes narrowed. A few students chuckled nervously. "Don't bother copying it down," Landon finally said, capping the marker. "You won't be tested on it." A ripple of relief passed through the room. "This," he said, gesturing toward the tangled web of notation, "is what separates curiosity from mastery." He paced slowly, letting the weight of his words settle. "Now, we've had a lot of buzz lately about problem solving. Some viral moments, some unexpected performances." He didn't say Jalen's name, but everyone turned toward him anyway. "I thought today," Landon continued, "we might push the boundaries a bit. Test how well instinct matches understanding." He pointed at the problem, then turned. "Mr. Cross." The air shifted again. "Would you be so kind as to join me at the board?" There was no hiding, no exit. Every pair of eyes landed on Jalen like tiny daggers, waiting to see if he'd flinch, fold, or fight. He stood slowly. His legs felt stiff, but his mind was already racing. What was the trap? What angle would Landon use? This wasn't about education. It was theater. When he reached the front, the problem towered over him, sprawled across the whiteboard, like an academic dare. He could feel Landon behind him, like a shadow cast too close. "No notes," Landon said. "Of course." Jalen didn't answer. He looked at the board, heart pounding, and read the equation again, this time with purpose. It was difficult. No question. Not impossible, but intricate. Every element was built to intimidate, to unravel confidence. And Jalen knew this wasn't about solving it. This was about making a point, about putting the diversity admit back in his place. He stepped closer and picked up the marker. The room was silent. He didn't start writing immediately. He just stood there, scanning the function. He needed to isolate, simplify, break the chaos into parts. Behind him, Landon crossed his arms and said casually, "Feel free to talk us through your thinking, if there is any." A few students snickered. Jalen turned slowly. "You want a breakdown? Or a solution?" Landon smiled faintly. Let's aim for both. Jalen turned back to the board, took a breath. Then, without warning, he began to write. First, he separated the composite functions, rewrote the constraint. The room remained tense, but some students started leaning forward. He paused only once to double-check an integral bound, then continued. He didn't rush. He didn't stall. He worked like someone who had done harder things in harder places, and who understood that sometimes the only way through humiliation was to turn it into discipline. After 8 minutes, he stepped back, complete. The board was filled, not cluttered. The logic was there. His method was different from a textbook's, but elegant in its own right. Landon approached slowly, eyes on the board. The room held its breath. Well, he said after a long pause, that's one way to do it. Some laughed. Others didn't. He picked up the marker, walked to one step in Jalen's process, and said, You used the vector transformation here? Yes, Jalen replied. Interesting. That's not the traditional approach. It's cleaner, Jalen said, not with pride but with fact. Landon stared at the board again, then nodded. Technically accurate, he said at last. Unexpected, but correct. The room shifted. This time the silence wasn't skepticism. It was surprise. And just like that, Jalen knew. He hadn't been called up to answer a question. He had been baited into an ambush, and walked out of it still standing. As he turned to walk back to his seat, Landon spoke again. One last thing, Mr. Cross. Jalen turned. This problem isn't in your assigned material, Landon said, voice smooth. How did you prepare for something that wasn't supposed to be known? Jalen froze. There it was. The accusation hiding in a compliment. The implication. You must have cheated. He looked straight at Landon. I study ahead, he said. You taught this method in a 2017 lecture online. It's still on YouTube. Landon blinked. The room shifted again. A few gasps. One student whispered, Damn. Jalen walked back to his seat. But even as he sat, he knew it wasn't over. Not even close. That night, returning to his dorm, Jalen found a manila envelope taped to his door. No name. No markings. Inside it, a single page, a scanned copy of his Ashbridge application essay. Highlighted, annotated, and labeled with the word flagged in red across the top. The marker stain on Jalen's fingers hadn't faded by morning, even after scrubbing his hands raw with cheap dorm soap. A faint smear of black ink clung to the side of his palm, a quiet echo of the day before. The equation, the confrontation, the envelope. It was all still with him, threading through every breath like static. He hadn't slept. The word flagged stamped across his admissions essay had looped in his mind like a skipping record. Who had accessed his file? Why now? How deep did this go? But none of those questions mattered at 9:55 a.m., when Jalen walked back into Landon's class. He had no choice. Attendance was mandatory, and absence would be recorded. And besides, running only confirmed suspicion. That was the trap. They built systems so that silence looked like guilt, and protest sounded like paranoia. He sat in his usual seat. No one acknowledged him. Even those who'd once side-eyed him with smirks now avoided eye contact entirely, as if proximity to him could pull their grades down, or taint their legacy recommendations. His presence wasn't just controversial now, it was radioactive. Dr. Landon entered as punctual as always, adjusting his sleeves with surgical precision. Without introduction, he turned to the board and began writing today's problem set. But Jalen didn't see the equations, not at first. He saw a whiteboard becoming a mirror, because every time he stepped forward to solve, to speak, to prove, something in him cracked open. This time, as he was called again, Mr. Cross, care to walk us through this one? His feet moved before his thoughts could resist. Another test, another performance, another chance to earn what? Respect? Safety? Just enough space to breathe? He stepped to the front. The board was filled with a brutal piece of math, nested integrals, rotating volumes, implicit differentiation. Advanced but not impossible. Not anymore. Still, his hands trembled as he picked up the chalk. And just like that, time folded inward. The board blurred. The voices dulled. His body was 17 again, slouched in a gray plastic chair in a Milwaukee classroom that smelled like mold and broken ambition. He was trying to concentrate on a worksheet when Mr. Lefferts, a teacher with a flat voice and sharper tongue, walked behind him. Jalen, the teacher had said with casual disdain, you're holding the pencil wrong. Jalen looked up, confused. This is how I always hold it. That might explain a lot. The words came like a slap. Other students laughed. No one defended him. The insult wasn't just about the pencil. It was about him.
You need to be realistic about your future, Leffert said after class. Some students are academic. Others, well, you seem more mechanical. That's not a bad thing.
Jalen had nodded then, pretending not to understand what was being said. But he'd gone home that day and dismantled his mother's toaster just to rebuild it, just to see if maybe mechanical could be something useful, something that hurt less. Now standing in front of a board at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, the same fear curled in his chest. They see me, but not the way I need to be seen. His hand trembled harder. He started writing. The first few steps came clean, logical. But then his mind slipped again. The lines on the board no longer felt linear. They twisted, bled into memory. His fingers remembered Mr. Lefferts gripping his shoulder too hard during detention. They remembered the way his middle school principal sighed before saying, "You're not slow, Jalen. You're just distracted, prone to disruption." That word disruption had followed him like a ghost. He tried to focus, recentered the equation, refactored one expression. But the grip on the chalk was too tight. Sweat made it slick. Pressure mounted behind his eyes. He knew they were all watching, some hoping he'd fall. Landon leaned forward just slightly, arms crossed, lips unreadable. Then, snap. The chalk broke in two between his fingers. The sound echoed louder than it should have. A collective gasp filled the lecture hall. One girl stifled a giggle. A guy in the third row leaned back with a smirk. Jalen froze. The two pieces of chalk clattered to the ground like teeth spit from a mouth. Landon stepped forward. "Is there a problem, Mr. Cross?" The tone was deceptively neutral, almost concerned. "No," Jalen said, barely audible. Just slipped. He knelt down slowly, gathering the pieces. One rolled under the podium. He didn't chase it. He used the shorter half and returned to the board, resuming with slightly shakier lines. But something had cracked. Not just the chalk, not just the board, but something in him. He finished the equation. It was correct. He knew it was. But he didn't wait for Landon's approval. He turned back to his seat, face tight, chest burning. As he sat, he noticed something on the desk in front of him. A yellow sticky note. It hadn't been there when he walked in. Written in hurried, all-caps ink were 4 words. "You were never invited." He didn't touch it, just stared at it. Landon continued the lecture, as if nothing had happened. The board was erased. The room moved on. But Jalen couldn't. His throat tightened. His lungs strained. He wasn't supposed to be affected. That was the rule. They didn't need to break you. They just needed to watch you break yourself. The rest of class passed in a haze. When the lecture ended, students began filing out. Some in a rush, some dragging their feet. No one looked at him. But as he stood, still shaken, the TA Jacob approached. "I saw what happened," he muttered, "with the chalk." Jalen looked at him, surprised. I thought you handled it well," Jacob said, looking down at his shoes. It was the first time in weeks someone had acknowledged the weight Jalen carried. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. "Thanks," Jalen replied quietly. But Jacob didn't linger. He walked away quickly. Jalen looked back at the desk, at the sticky note still there. He crumpled it slowly in his hand. Then he turned to leave. Just as he stepped into the hallway, his phone buzzed. An anonymous text message flashed on his screen. "Check your student file before they change it." By mid-morning, Ashbridge University felt like a pressure cooker on the brink. Word had spread across campus. The black kid aced Landon's impossible problem. Some whispered it as a warning, others as a rallying cry. The academic muscles of the amphitheater were flexing in tension. Jalen shuffled into his next class. Applied physics with a knot in his stomach. Fellowship had never been easy at Ashbridge for him. But today felt different. He passed clusters of students talking animatedly, leaning toward their phones, eyes flicking over something he didn't yet know. He found his seat and sat down, trying to focus on the lecture. Equations of motion, energy vectors. You couldn't beat physics for its honesty. But Jalen's mind was elsewhere. Every rustle of paper, every doodle that wasn't scribbling, pulled him into a vortex he couldn't escape. During a quick break, he glanced at his phone, and the campus news splashed across the screen like wildfire. A video clip, barely 30 seconds long. The moment he began solving Landon's calculus monster. It played again and again. The markers, the board, the focused expression on his face. Just as he appeared to reach the solution, it cut off. The caption read, "When he shut Landon up. Watch this black boy." More hashtags. Some praising, some mocking. Show off, token, joke, and even a few that said, "We stand black excellence." Comments were a bloodbath. Who let him in? You go, genius kid. Don't let affirmative action define you. You won't last a month. Jalen felt like the center of a friction flame. Half the internet was cheering him on. The other half was throwing gasoline. When class ended, he walked back through the quad, phone buzzing non-stop. Group chats flooded with screenshots. Memes inserted him into movie scenes. One edit placed him into the Matrix. Chalk in hand, the caption "Neo has entered the system." He tried to laugh. He really did. But each tag and ping felt like a thread tightening around his chest. Back in the dorm, the door swung open. His roommate, Harper, tall, quiet, African-American with an easy aura, held his phone up as Jalen walked in. "You've gone viral," Harper said quietly, pacing. "In the best way, and not the best way." "What's the ratio?" Jalen asked, voice hollow. "Depends on where you look." Harper swiped through their feed. Most of the memes are sarcastic, but the math community, professors, grad students, they're eating it up. They want you in their study groups, research labs. "That's good, right?" Jalen asked, uncertain. Harper looked at him, eyes serious. "Yeah. But there's another side. Spaces are forming. Groups. Chat rooms mocking you. Betting on when you'll fail. Someone tagged you in a post. Durability test. How long until he cracks?" Jalen felt a hollow churn in his stomach. Harper closed the door. "Mate, you need to be careful. People are watching. It's not just numbers anymore." Jalen nodded, swallowing. He leaned against his desk, the room swaying slightly. The image of himself on the video flashed behind his eyes, the slight furrow of his brow, the way his fingers curled around that marker, like a lifeline. He didn't answer Harper right away. Could he possibly explain the contradiction? That praise and hate could live in the same space simultaneously. That visibility felt like both oxygen and acid. The corridor outside their door hummed with distant chatter, laughter, footsteps. Harper's voice cut a quiet edge into the room. "They're planning something." Jalen's breath hitched cold, hollow. This time it didn't sound like a rumor. It sounded like a warning. That night, as Jalen checked his email, his inbox pinged with a message from an Ashbridge student organization. "Join us tomorrow, 8 a.m., Simmons Hall." The subject line read only, "We want your story." The email arrived just after midnight. Subject: Ashbridge Public Math Decathlon. Departmental Special Session. Sender: Office of the Mathematics Chair. Body: Dr. Landon will host a special open challenge next Friday. Students may volunteer. Finalists will be selected to compete live on stage. Prizes include research internships, departmental recommendation letters, and formal recognition at the Fall Scholars Ceremony. It wasn't signed by Landon directly, but everyone knew who pulled the strings. By morning, posters were taped across campus. Numbers don't lie, but people do. Join us for a live intellectual showdown. To the students, it was an event. To the administration, it was optics. But to Jalen, it was something else entirely.
It was a trap.
He stared at the poster for a long time, heart pounding. Landon hadn't named him, but he didn't have to. The subtext was loud enough to echo off the brick walls. The entire challenge had been constructed to corner him into a decision he couldn't win. Decline? You look like a coward who folded when the spotlight came. Accept? You step into a lion's den, where the rules were built to break you. Harper found him staring at the poster outside the dining hall. "They're framing it as academic rigor," he said quietly. "But this isn't about math. It's about dominance." Jalen nodded slowly. "If I back out, I validate everything they've whispered. If I win, they'll say it was rigged or lucky." Harper hesitated. "You already know what you're going to do, don't you?" Jalen didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next day, Landon addressed the announcement in class. He didn't need theatrics. His presence alone commanded attention. "Some of you may have seen the invitation," he said, turning to face the room. "Let me be clear, this is not required. This is not about grades. This is about courage." Then, as he slowly scanned the rows of students, his gaze landed on Jalen without landing directly. "Of course, those who've had viral moments should be especially encouraged to show their brilliance under real pressure." The bait was thick, the tone condescending. Later that afternoon, A sign-up sheet made its way around class. Jalen didn't hesitate. He wrote his name down, not at the top, not at the bottom, but right in the middle, a neutral declaration, a calm before whatever storm would follow. The campus erupted, group chats exploded, threads spun out of control. Some students cheered him on, others questioned his qualifications. Comments littered online forums. He's setting himself up. Can't wait to see Landon humble this dude. Actually rooting for the kid. Let's hope he doesn't choke on stage. Harper tried to reason with him that night. You were walking into a staged performance. Jay Landon picked the time, the format, the judges. Everything's stacked. I know, Jalen said, eyes fixed on a set of equations he had already solved twice. So why go? Because if I don't, they rewrite me into what they already believe. And if I do, I get to tell my own story. 2 nights before the decathlon, Jalen stayed late in the library. Beyond midnight, the space was emptying when a student worker approached him. She looked barely older than him. Long braids, dark hoodie, eyes that scanned before she spoke. You're Jalen, right? He nodded. She placed a flash drive on the desk. Someone said to give you this. Said it might help level the field. Ho! She looked over her shoulder. Didn't say. But they said check your inbox too. Before he could ask more, she disappeared down the stairwell. Back in the dorm, Harper looked up from his laptop when Jalen returned.
You good?
Jalen nodded. Someone gave me this. He plugged in the flash drive. Inside was one folder, labeled Landon Exposed. They opened it slowly, scanned PDFs, internal memos, academic hearing summaries, redacted faculty memos from over a decade ago. What unfolded was chilling. Landon had once been under internal investigation at a different university. 2 black graduate students, both excelling in his advanced courses, had filed complaints of academic sabotage. Despite strong midterm scores and project evaluations, both students failed final assessments under suspicious circumstances. One withdrew from the program completely. The other filed a grievance and transferred out. Buried inside the report were statements from a tenured colleague. Dr. Landon exhibits signs of subconscious racial bias. He dismisses the capabilities of students who don't fit his traditional archetype. In group evaluations, he overrides input when those students rank high. He thrives in public control. The internal review recommended professional development and a temporary suspension, but the university, fearful of public scandal, reassigned him to an administrative role until the situation cooled. 2 years later, Landon resurfaced at Ashbridge. Jalen stared at the screen. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't imagining the pattern. The next ping came from his inbox. From anonymous user 57. Subject: ask Landon about. Below it, a message with one line. Control is his addiction. Stage is his drug. But a mirror breaks both. Harper leaned in. Who do you think sent this? Jalen sat back. I don't know, but someone's been watching longer than we thought. There was one more item on the flash drive. An audio file. They played it. It was grainy but clear enough. Landon's voice. Unmistakable. Some students mistake cleverness for competence, especially the ones who come from different backgrounds. They shine for a second and think they deserve the spotlight. The venom in the tone was subtle, controlled, practiced. Harper paused the playback. Are you going to use it? Jalen didn't answer. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. This was about all the students Landon had erased, all the minds he'd silenced before they could even find their voices. He stared at the quote in the faculty report again. He thrives in public control. Take away the audience, and he crumbles. The challenge wasn't just to beat Landon. It was to unravel him. The next morning, a second email hit Jalen's inbox from a restricted faculty address. No subject line. No body text. Just a file attachment titled Confidential Ashbridge Faculty Misconducted. Log 2011. The sun had barely set, but campus already felt dimmer. Jalen sat on the edge of the concrete planter outside Simmons Hall, staring at the unopened faculty misconduct log, still sitting in his inbox. His thumb hovered over it, unsure whether reading it would sharpen his mind or break something else inside him. It had been a week of shadows, from viral videos to anonymous emails, from silent stares in the dining hall to side conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. Everything had shifted, and now with the decathlon looming, the air around him thickened into something else entirely, isolation wrapped in performance. He'd nearly given up on the meeting. No one had responded to his RSVP for the campus org event. But just as he stood to leave, A voice spoke beside him, quiet and careful. "You're the math kid." Jalen turned. A man stood there, maybe mid-60s, wearing a navy blue janitor's uniform, with the Ashbridge emblem stitched neatly on the chest. His skin was worn deep brown, his hands large and lined with calluses, but his posture was firm. Alert. "I've seen you. Lecture hall. The board work." Jalen nodded hesitantly. "Yeah." The man glanced around, then handed Jalen a folded note from his back pocket. "I used to teach at MIT. Meet me at 6 p.m. Library basement. Study room B." Then, without waiting for a reply, he turned and disappeared around the corner of Simmons. Jalen stared after him, stunned. At 5:58, Jalen pushed open the heavy basement door of the library, heart pounding. The hallway was dim, lined with yellowed posters about silent study etiquette. Room B was at the far end, the only one with light spilling from beneath it. He knocked. "Come in," came the voice. Inside, the janitor stood next to a low wooden table. A large weathered cardboard box sat beside him. "Name's Maurice," the man said. "Maurice Dillon." Jalen shook his hand. "You really taught at MIT." "For 13 years, Maurice said. "Assistant professor of applied mathematics. Tenure track. Then tenure denied."
Why?
Maurice shrugged. "Depends who you ask. They said I wasn't publishing fast enough. I say I wasn't publishing what they wanted." He opened the box. Inside were dozens of old, hardbound calculus and advanced theory books. Some were annotated in fine red ink. A few were signed by professors Jalen had only read about. Maurice lifted out one thin photo frame and handed it to Jalen. It was black and white. Maurice stood beside a much younger Dr. Peter Landon. "We were postdocs together. Same fellowship program. Same seminar group. Only difference was, he was always better at playing the room. I was better at proving the math. And he ended up here because he knew how to market himself and how to bury those who didn't." Jalen looked down at the photo again, stunned. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're standing in the same fire I stood in. And if someone had reached out to me, then maybe I wouldn't have been pushed out." Maurice gestured to the box. "These books? Some of the best thinking never published. I saved what I could. I'll lend them to you, if you're willing to learn what Landon doesn't teach." Jalen swallowed hard. "I'm in." Maurice nodded slowly.
Then we begin.
"Tonight." He pulled out a binder, thick, dusty, labeled simply Theory Notes, 1987, 2000, 2002. Inside were pages of equations, diagrams, marginal notes. Maurice moved like a surgeon when handling the pages, lifting them with care, pausing occasionally to point at a line. "You see that?" he asked, tapping a sequence of integrals. "That was my original proof." Landon saw it once. He challenged it, of course. Then 6 years later, he published something strikingly similar, but with a key attribution missing. "Your name?" "Exactly." Jalen leaned in, brow furrowed. "You ever confront him?" Maurice laughed, bitter and low, in private. "Once," he said. "You didn't publish it, Maurice. The math belongs to the one who tells the story loudest. That's theft. It's tenure." Maurice closed the binder and reached for another folder. This one thinner but marked in red ink. "Landon's lecture notes. Unpublished. Someone sent me these anonymously years ago. Probably a student who saw too much. It's Landon's handwriting, but the math isn't his. At least not originally." He opened to a page labeled Symplectic Geometry Applications in Optimization. Maurice pointed to the margin. "That annotation is mine." He copied it down word for word. Jalen felt something shift inside him. Rage. Yes, but also clarity. This wasn't just about academic performance. This was about historical erasure. Generational theft disguised as intellectual hierarchy. "How'd you end up here?" Jalen asked. Maurice shrugged. "After MIT let me go, jobs got scarce. I did consulting, then tutoring. Eventually, I took a maintenance contract at Ashbridge. I figured, if they wouldn't let me teach, I'd at least stay near the math." Jalen was quiet for a long time. "You think I can beat him?" Maurice didn't blink. "You already did. But that's not what this is about anymore. This is about exposing him. Publicly. Strategically." He slid a legal pad toward Jalen. "Let's build the weapon he won't see coming." For the next 3 hours, they worked. Not on the decathlon problems, which Maurice dismissed as surface-level bait, but on the logic beneath them. On counter approaches. on traps Landon might set, on exposing weaknesses in method. By the end of the night, Jalen's notebook was filled with strategies. But more than that, it held something else, the power of lineage, of a mind like his, once silenced, now speaking again through him. As they packed up, Maurice handed him the original binder. Keep this safe. One day, this story needs to be told. Not just mine. Yours too. Jalen nodded, voice thick. Thank you. As he turned to leave, Maurice added, oh, and one more thing. He reached into the bottom of the box and pulled out another photo. It was the same group shot. But in this version, there was a third man. That's Dr. Emery Langston. He was our department head. He's the one who covered for Landon. Retired a few years ago. What happened to him? Lives in Connecticut. Private man now. But he knows everything. Jalen tucked the photo into his notebook. He walked out of the library basement with a full mind and a fuller heart. For the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. He felt armed. The next morning, a brown envelope slid under Jalen's dorm door. Inside it, a single sheet, a screenshot of his meeting with Maurice, captured from a security camera angle. At the bottom, a note scribbled in red, "You're being watched. Choose wisely." The envelope sat on Jalen's desk like a threat. A surveillance, still grainy and angled, showed him in the library basement, sitting across from Maurice Dillon. The timestamp was clear. So was the implication. Someone inside the institution was monitoring him, watching his every move. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how many eyes had followed him since the first day he stepped foot on campus. Wondering if the idea of mentorship, of community, of being seen for his mind rather than his profile, was always meant to be punished. By morning, he made his decision. He wasn't backing down. The next few days unfolded like a secret ritual. Between classes and mandatory labs, Jalen slipped into the library basement, where Maurice had reserved an unused maintenance closet, converted now into a makeshift war room. The air was thick with old books and fluorescent hum. The scent of floor polish lingered beneath every session. Maurice didn't just tutor him in calculus. He rewired the way Jalen thought about math, about systems, about power. This isn't just numbers, Jay, Maurice said one afternoon, drawing a clean axis across the whiteboard they'd propped against a mop sink. Calculus is a map of how change happens. Every derivative is about motion. Every integral is about accumulation. You want to win this thing, don't just solve, interpret. Jalen scribbled notes, but the words landed deeper than any lesson from a textbook. Landon will bait you with complexity, Maurice continued. He'll frame the questions to look neutral, but his assumptions never are. That's how gatekeeping works. They build problems from contexts they know you weren't taught. Like physics questions based on rowing teams and yachting angles. Jalen muttered. Exactly. So when you miss them, it looks like a skill gap. But it's cultural coding. Jalen stopped writing. Maurice leaned back. This game isn't just about answers. It's about how institutions disguise preference as merit. That night, Jalen practiced for hours. Not just with numbers, but with approach. He studied Landon's old problems, annotated recorded lectures, built solution trees for every possible twist. He recreated exams from memory and compared them to Maurice's alternate frameworks. But somewhere between the proofs and practice, something deeper emerged, a sense of self he hadn't known he was building. Maurice would push him, stop him mid-equation to ask, why that method? Or what does this imply about how you see the boundary? At first it frustrated him, but over time it became clear, Maurice wasn't just shaping a mathematician. He was helping him become someone unshakable. You're not just solving problems, he said once. You're proving you belong, even if they'll never admit it. Jalen never asked what that cost Maurice. But he could see it in the way Maurice lingered over old proofs, or stared too long at faculty rosters he used to be on. One night, after solving a particularly brutal optimization problem, Jalen sat back, breathless. Maurice just nodded. Now that's how you win without them even seeing you coming. Jalen smiled. Not out of pride, but from finally understanding the layers. It was late Thursday when it happened. Jalen was crossing the quad, tablet in hand, replaying a recorded strategy Maurice had left for him, talking through the limits of conditional convergence, when he heard footsteps approaching. He didn't look up. Not until the shadow crossed directly in front of him. Dr. Peter Landon. They almost collided. Jalen stopped. So did Landon. It was quiet. Only the hum of distant lampposts and the rustle of dry leaves filled the air. "Evening," Landon said curtly. Jalen nodded. "Professor." Landon's eyes drifted downward toward the tablet in Jalen's hand. The screen glowed faintly. "What's that?" he asked, tilting his head. Jalen's thumb instinctively moved to lock the screen. But too late. The equation displayed was complicated, one of Maurice's unsolved historical challenges. Above it was a header, revisiting Dylan's hypothesis, optimized. Landon's face barely moved. "Interesting proof," he said evenly. "Where'd you get that?" Jalen held his gaze. "Been doing some independent study." Landon stared for a moment longer, then gave a tight smile. "Be careful who you study with. Some minds decay in basements." Jalen felt his jaw tighten. But Landon didn't wait for a reply. He simply nodded once and walked away, shoes tapping softly against the cobblestone path. Jalen stood there, breath caught in his chest. That night, when Jalen returned to his dorm, his tablet buzzed with a new notification, an unscheduled calendar invite sent from the math department server. It read, "Private decathlon prep session, Friday, room 42C. Attendance mandatory." Ashbridge's historic auditorium hadn't been this full in years. Rows of mahogany seats overflowed with students, faculty, and alumni. The decathlon, once a quiet departmental showcase, had morphed into a spectacle, half academic competition, half gladiator ring. The event poster had done its job well. Black serif font on a stark white background. Ashbridge Public Math Decathlon. Logic. Proof. Prestige. But beneath that veneer of elegance, the subtext buzzed in every whispered conversation. "This, the one with the viral kid?" "Yeah, the black dude. They say Landon's gunning for him." Affirmative action finally meets actual math. Backstage, Jalen sat alone. He'd arrived early, headphones on, blocking out the murmurs. He wore a simple black button-up and dark jeans. No logos, no flash, just the same precision he brought to every formula. His tablet sat beside him, screen dark, reflecting his focused eyes. Maurice had told him to breathe, to anchor himself in the math, not the room. "You don't perform for them," he'd said. "You solve for you." Jalen repeated those words like prayer. A stage assistant finally waved him forward. He rose. The noise of the audience swelled as he stepped into the spotlight. His presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He scanned the rows and found Harper halfway back, sitting straight, lips tight. Beside him, Maurice, barely visible, his janitor's uniform swapped for a plain blazer. Jalen stepped behind the long table, where 3 other finalists were already seated. One was a senior from Stanford, doing a semester exchange. Another a white Ashbridge senior with a physics double major. The third, a woman from Cornell who had already published in Mathematical Review. No one nodded at him. Dr. Landon took the podium. "Welcome all," he said. "Tonight we showcase not only brilliance, but composure. Intellect means nothing without grace under pressure." A small smattering of applause. Landon's gaze swept the stage, and paused for half a second too long on Jalen. "The rules are simple. 1 board. 1 problem per round. Solve. Explain. Survive." The crowd chuckled politely. Round 1 was announced. A screen behind the stage flashed the first problem, a multi-step combinatorics puzzle, disguised in a real-world statistical framing. Each contestant took turns solving at the board. The Stanford student finished in 2 minutes flat. The Cornell mathematician took 3, correcting herself halfway through. The Ashbridge senior stumbled slightly, but recovered. Then Jalen stepped forward. As he reached the board, a voice from the back hissed loud enough to carry, "Coda boy's turn." A ripple of laughter. Jalen didn't flinch. He solved the problem in 90 seconds, then turned and delivered a clean breakdown of each line. His voice even, his pace calm. The room was dead silent. The judges, seated at the side, conferred briefly. A score appeared on the screen. Landon's brow twitched. Round 2 began. The problems intensified. Nested limits, integral transforms, abstract algebraic functions. One contestant cracked. The Ashbridge senior couldn't complete his proof and was eliminated. The Stanford student stalled, but scraped by. Jalen? He never dropped tempo, but he didn't gloat. Every step was measured, as if he were solving in private. By round 4, only 2 contestants remained, Jalen and the Cornell mathematician. The problem appeared, Topology within multivariable constraints. Jalen's eyes narrowed. It was Maurice's signature approach, though twisted stylized to look like Landon's own. Jalen saw it instantly. He solved it silently, but when it was time to explain, he changed strategy. "Let me walk you through the flaw first," he began. The room leaned in. He didn't just solve. He taught, line by line. He dismantled the logic and reassembled it stronger. When he finished, one of the judges looked visibly shaken. The screen flashed again. Landon took the stage. "For our final question," he said, voice rich with ceremony, "a legacy problem. One that has stumped many minds." The board lit up. Jalen stared. He knew this question. He'd seen it weeks ago. In Maurice's files. In the old thesis draft Landon never published. The problem was nearly identical to the one Landon had failed to solve himself years ago. The crowd didn't notice, but Jalen did. And as he stood, his eyes dropped to the lower corner of the projected board. There, faint but unmistakable, was a watermark, a name. Landon. Jalen's breath caught. Someone had left a mark. Maurice had told him once. A mind can be erased from rosters, but not from the work. He stepped to the board, his fingers trembling. The math itself wasn't the obstacle. It was the implication. Landon had selected this as the final problem. Likely unaware, the digital version he submitted had Maurice's name embedded. Or maybe he did know, and was confident no one else would recognize it. Either way, Jalen had a decision to make. Solve it cleanly, or tell the room what they were really watching. He picked up the marker and began. But this time, he did something different. He didn't jump to the core of the problem. He began slowly, teaching. "I want to walk through this one differently," he said. The judges glanced at each other. This problem isn't unfamiliar. In fact, it's been around for decades, circulated in a handful of academic circles. Most never solve it. Not because it's too hard, but because it was never meant to be solved alone. He paused. "I didn't solve this on my own either. I was taught a method, a legacy not on this stage, but in this room." He gestured, subtly, toward Maurice in the crowd. A few heads turned. "Much of what I know didn't come from textbooks or tenured faculty," Jalen continued. "It came from someone who wasn't given a stage. Someone whose work lives in shadows because it made others uncomfortable." Landon shifted at the podium. "But tonight," Jalen said, "that changes." He turned back to the board. With each line, he called out what he was doing. Not just solving, but citing, naming techniques, referencing origins, elevating the silent. He finished with 10 seconds to spare. The room was dead still. Then, a voice from the back. "Let the man speak." All eyes turned. Maurice stood, slowly. Landon opened his mouth to interject, but the judges' panel motioned for silence. Maurice didn't speak long. "I taught that problem to a room once," he said. "No one solved it, but this man just did. Because he saw it wasn't about ego. It was about clarity." He sat. The audience remained hushed. Then, applause. Soft at first. Then louder. Building. Jalen didn't smile. He stepped back and returned to his seat. The screen lit up. Final score. Landon looked pale. As the room erupted, a faculty assistant leaned in to whisper something in Landon's ear. He nodded stiffly. The assistant turned to the mic. "Due to new information, we are suspending the final announcement. Please remain seated." The auditorium emptied in slow, stunned waves. Whispers bounced from row to row like echoes in a canyon. No one understood exactly what had just happened, only that it had cracked something open. Jalen stepped out of the spotlight and into uncertainty. Landon hadn't made a final announcement. The decathlon ended in a haze of confusion and murmured theories. Some called it sabotage. Others called it justice. Jalen called it unfinished. But less than 24 hours later, everything became painfully clear. It started with a video, posted by an anonymous account. Late that night, it had no caption, just a title behind closed doors, "Landon on the kid." The footage was grainy, the audio scratchy, but the content crystal clear. It was a recording of Dr. Peter Landon, seated in what looked like his office, talking to two other faculty members. One was blurred, the other partially visible. "He's got flair," Landon said, voice laced with contempt. "But it's performative. These kids, they're good at mimicry. They don't innovate, they imitate." One professor laughed. "Still, he embarrassed you tonight." Landon didn't miss a beat. "He didn't embarrass me. He embarrassed himself by thinking he belongs. It's one thing to solve an equation, It's another to understand legacy. He'll fade. They always do. Jalen watched the clip in his dorm, Harper sitting beside him in silence. Neither spoke. The words were louder than the footage. Within hours, the internet did what it does best. It burned. Hashtags began trending by sunrise. Landon exposed. Math is racist. Protect black genius. Students flooded Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. How many others has Landon buried? He said the quiet part out loud. Fire him. Now. Alumni weighed in. Even celebrities reposted the video, commenting on the audacity of academic gatekeeping. News outlets caught wind. A CNN headline read, "Elite university professor caught mocking black students' achievement." By mid-morning, students began gathering on the quad. Handmade signs, chants, chalk messages across the marble steps. Diversity is not decor. Legacy male intelligence. Inside the administration building, chaos brewed. Emails flew. Donors called. The board demanded answers. And in the midst of it all, the university president, Dr. Evelyn Monroe, scheduled an emergency meeting. Closed door. All department heads required. Jalen received no invitation, no statement, no apology. But Harper burst into their dorm room, holding his phone. They just announced it. Jalen looked up. The presidents called them in. All of them. Landon's on the chopping block. Jalen blinked, stunned. Harper added, "And the whole school's watching." As Harper turned the screen toward him, a new email landed in Jalen's inbox. Subject line, "Urgent, speak to no one. Legal affairs will contact you." The walls of Ashbridge were thinning. What had once been hushed hallways and careful nods had become loud. Open. Electric. The campus crackled with confrontation. Students posted flyers bearing Jalen's face. With bold text, he solved it. They tried to silence him. Faculty walked faster. Meetings were booked back to back. No one wanted to be caught in the gray. And in the center of the storm, Jalen, watching the institution flinch. But not everyone stayed silent. The clip of Landon's behind-the-scenes slander now had over 2 million views. A second leak followed. This time, a screenshot of Maurice's original research paper, dated and time-stamped, matched against one of Landon's early lectures. Identical phrasing, same variables, same conclusion. Someone had finally connected the dots. The pressure boiled. Students began protesting outside Landon's office. "Resign," they chanted. "This isn't academia, it's theft." Landon didn't respond publicly, but behind his office door, the rage fermented. That Thursday, the lecture hall was full again. Not just students, but reporters, grad students, TAs. Everyone knew this might be the day something cracked. Jalen took his usual seat. Calm. Focused. Maurice's words echoed in his ear. "Stay grounded in the math. Let them spiral." "Not you." Landon entered late. He didn't make eye contact. His normally sharp attire was unkempt. No blazer. Sleeves rolled. His voice trembled slightly as he began the lecture, chalk scratching the board like static. He wrote a new problem on the board. Deliberately complex, chaotic in its logic. Then, as always, he turned. "Mr. Cross, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate your brilliance once more." Jalen stood slowly, marker in hand. But before he could write, Landon snapped. "You plagiarized it, didn't you?" he blurted. The room froze. "You've been coached," Landon continued, louder now. "Fed answers. That's how you solved my decathlon. Admit it." Gasps broke through the crowd. Jalen stared at him, stunned. "Excuse me? You heard me. You cheated. This entire campus thinks you're some savant. But all you've done is regurgitate someone else's work. You're not a genius. You're a puppet." A TA dropped her pen. Jalen remained silent. Then a new voice rang out from the back. "No. He's my student now." All heads turned. Maurice Dillon stood at the door, holding a folder. He walked slowly to the front, opened the folder, and laid it on the desk. Inside, side by side, scans of his original notes and Jalen's adapted versions. Everything he learned through integrity, through study, through mentorship. He turned to the class. "You want proof?" Maurice said. "I've got 20 years of it." Landon's face contorted. "This is outrageous," he shouted. "He's not faculty. He's a janitor. He has no standing." Maurice didn't blink. "But my math does." Gasps turned into murmurs. A few students applauded. The classroom door opened again. This time 2 campus security officers entered. One whispered to Landon. "No," Landon said. "This is my class. My campus. I built this department. The officer repeated himself. Landon's voice cracked. He embarrassed me. That's what this is. Punishing me for not handing over my seat. No one spoke. Security escorted him from the room. But what happened next shocked everyone. As Landon reached the hallway, a woman stood waiting. Dr. Evelyn Monroe, the university president. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply handed him a printed document. It was a notice of administrative leave. You're no longer authorized to teach, she said. Effective immediately. Landon's face drained of color. He opened his mouth but no sound came out. He took the paper, hands trembling, and walked off without another word. Back inside the lecture hall, a stunned silence lingered. Maurice turned back to the students. He's not the only one who ever made this department great, he said. He looked at Jalen. You don't need their title to teach. That's when the whispers started. I heard they're offering Jalen a TA spot.
No way.
He deserves it. Students began gathering near the front. Some shook Jalen's hand. Others asked for notes. One even asked if he'd tutor over the weekend. For the first time since setting foot on campus, Jalen wasn't just surviving Ashbridge. He was becoming part of it. That evening, Maurice and Jalen sat outside the dorm, watching the sun set behind the library tower. You did it, Maurice said quietly. Jalen shook his head. We did it, Maurice smiled. You're the one who stood there and didn't fold. I was terrified. So was I. The difference is, you had someone in your corner. Jalen nodded slowly. Yeah, I did. Maurice reached into his coat and handed him a small flash drive. What's this?
My last thesis.
The one they buried. It's yours now. Jalen clutched it, wordless. As they sat in the fading light, neither spoke. Because something unspoken had happened. Not just justice, but restoration. As the door shut behind them for the night, a new email landed in Jalen's inbox. Subject, visiting scholar lecture request. Department of Mathematics, Stanford University. 3 weeks had passed since Dr. Peter Landon was escorted out of his own classroom. In academic terms, it was a blink. In cultural memory, it felt like a decade. Ashbridge University hadn't been the same since. The decathlon scandal, the leaked footage, the walkout, each moment layered onto the next, like the steps of an irreversible proof. What began as a single equation on a whiteboard had multiplied into something no one could ignore. A movement. And now, the math department, an institution historically resistant to change, was finally bending. It started with a press release. Ashbridge Mathematics Department to launch the Cross Initiative, a scholarship for underrepresented students in STEM, named in honor of Jalen Cross, whose pursuit of academic truth challenged legacy, exposed injustice, and redefined excellence. Jalen read the words twice. 3 times. He was sitting in Maurice's office, no longer a basement closet, but a proper adjunct room with his name printed on the door. The nameplate had arrived last week. Maurice didn't say anything when he saw it. He just ran his fingers across it like he was touching something sacred. Look at that, Maurice had whispered. Took them 40 years to remember my degree. Took you 1 semester to give me back my dignity. Now they sat side by side, watching the announcement roll across their screens. The scholarship was real. The donation fund was growing by the hour. Alumni were pledging support. Even faculty who once kept their distance were now congratulating Jalen in hallways, as though they'd always believed in him. Maurice had warned him this would happen. Victory makes cowards into allies, he said. They'll call you inspiring, so they never have to call you what they used to. Jalen smiled at that. But deep down, he knew the difference now. The university hadn't changed because it wanted to. It had changed because it had been made to. The office door creaked open. Harper stepped in, holding a rolled-up poster. They made these for the campus bulletin, he said, unrolling it. Jalen froze. It was a photo of him back-turned, writing on the board during the decathlon. Overlaid were the words, "Knowledge belongs to those who claim it." Harper grinned. You're officially folklore now. Maurice chuckled. You should have seen the one they made for me in '87. They spelled my name wrong. They all laughed, but Jalen stayed quiet. Part of him felt pride. Another part still felt heavy. He knew what it had cost. Not just the public humiliation, but the hours of self-doubt. The fear. The knowing that at any moment, it could all be taken again. Still, today was different. Today they were building something new. Maurice handed him a folder. You ready? Inside were lesson plans. for a class Jalen would co-teach next semester. Introduction to Critical Reasoning in Applied Mathematics. His name was listed under co-instructor. I thought you said they weren't ready for us, Jalen said. They're not, Maurice replied. But we're not waiting anymore. Later that afternoon, Jalen walked across the quad toward the mathematics building. The air had changed. Students nodded as he passed. Some waved. One first year, wide-eyed and nervous, stopped him to ask if he could sit in on the new course. Jalen said yes. When he reached the hallway, outside room 217, the classroom where everything began, he paused. A new sign hung outside the door. Cross Scholar Seminar Room. His throat caught. He pushed the door open. Empty. Silent. But full of memory. He sat at the desk where he once found a note that read, "You don't belong here." Now his name was on the door. He stayed there for a long while. Not speaking. Not thinking. Just being. Back at his dorm later that night, a plain envelope waited for him. No return address. Inside was a handwritten letter. It was from Landon. The handwriting was tight. Controlled. Jalen, I've had time to reflect. Not just on the events, but on my part in them. I won't ask for forgiveness. That would be indulgent. I will say this. You were a better mathematician than I allowed myself to admit, and a better man than I ever was willing to be. I am not writing for redemption. I am writing to confess that the system served me far longer than it should have. And you disrupted it. Keep doing that. P.L. Jalen sat down, letter in hand. He didn't feel triumph. He felt truth. Because even in defeat, Landon had recognized what the institution refused to name. That talent, like dignity, doesn't come from who you are to the world, but what you refuse to let the world take from you. He folded the letter, placed it inside Maurice's thesis binder, then opened his laptop to begin drafting the first lesson for their spring course. Just as he began typing, an email notification popped up. Subject: TEDx invitation, redefining genius. We'd like you to headline. The air was colder than expected for spring. It carried a heaviness that wasn't in the temperature, but in the mood. Jalen sat inside the small conference room off the administration wing, the same place where Landon once presided over academic panels like a king at court. Now the seats were turned. The door opened. Dr. Evelyn Monroe entered first, followed by a representative from University Legal Counsel, then last Peter Landon. He looked smaller now. His suit was pressed, but his face was sunken, his eyes rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that doesn't sleep off. His gait was slower. The air of superiority that once defined him had vanished, replaced by something closer to fragility. Jalen stood but didn't offer his hand. Landon sat across from him, folding his fingers, the silence heavy between them. Thank you for agreeing to this, Monroe said quietly. There's no pressure, just the opportunity to speak. Landon took a breath. I'll be direct. I know the university is considering legal action. I know you have grounds: academic fraud, retaliation, hostile environment, and I know the press is circling. Jalen said nothing. I can't undo what I did, Landon continued, but I can tell the truth, publicly, on record. I'll step forward and acknowledge what I took, the credit, the space, the safety. I'll do it if you agree not to press charges. Monroe cleared her throat. We leave this decision entirely to Mr. Cross. Jalen looked at Landon, not the professor but the man. He saw someone who wasn't sorry he got caught, but someone who, maybe for the first time, realized the cost of what he'd built. Jalen's voice was calm. You didn't just hurt me, you made it harder for people who came before me. People like Maurice, people who won't ever get their names on scholarships. Landon lowered his eyes. You took more than credit, Jalen continued. You weaponized excellence. You made it seem like our success had to come with your approval. Silence. But if you're willing to step aside, Jalen said, not just from the university, but from the narrative, then I won't stand in your way. Landon looked up, stunned. You'll let it go? I'll let you go, Jalen corrected. What I won't let go is the truth. He stood. Monroe nodded. We'll begin transition planning. Thank you, Jalen. As Jalen left the room, the press outside surged forward. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in his face. Mr. Cross, will you pursue legal action? Is it true you're joining the faculty next year? Do you believe Ashbridge has truly changed? Jalen didn't stop walking. His answer came in silence, and in where he was heading. The graduation ceremony was held on the south lawn, a stage built on raised platforms, folding chairs in perfect rows. Parents, friends, Faculty. The press lined the perimeter, silent, now, but waiting. Jalen stood backstage, cap and gown crisp, tassel swaying. He wasn't valedictorian. That title went to a student who hadn't seen half the war Jalen fought. But he had been asked to speak. He'd declined, not out of fear, but because some truths speak louder through presence than words. The announcer called names in alphabetical order. As they reached Cross, Jalen, he stepped forward. The crowd stood, some clapped. Others roared, and as he reached the center of the stage, he paused. In the third row, standing alone, was someone he hadn't expected. His father, the man who left when Jalen was 7. He wore a borrowed suit, held a program. His eyes shimmered. Jalen froze. He hadn't seen the man in over a decade. Last he'd heard, his father had moved out west, disappeared into a series of night jobs and back rent. Jalen had never spoken of him, not to Harper, not to Maurice, not even to his mother. But here he was. Jalen felt the weight of memory press against the present. The missed birthdays, the long silences, the way his mother had to be 2 parents at once. His father didn't speak, but he mouthed something. I saw it all. Jalen's legs moved on their own. Across the stage, through the applause, down the steps, toward the third row. The crowd parted without instruction. And when he reached his father, the two just stared at each other. Then his father reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a worn photo. Jalen as a boy, solving a puzzle at the kitchen table. I kept it, his father whispered, even when I didn't keep anything else. Jalen took the photo, his hands shaking. For a moment the world was silent. Not in erasure, but in forgiveness. Later that evening, Jalen sat beneath the old elm tree by the mathematics building. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in lavender and gold. Maurice joined him, carrying 2 cups of tea. You saw him, Maurice said. Jalen nodded. Yeah, you speak? A little. Maurice passed him the cup. Sometimes a little is enough. They sipped in silence. Did you make your final decision? Maurice asked. About Landon? Maurice nodded.
Yeah, Jalen said.
I'm not pressing charges, but he's going to confess, publicly, everything. Maurice didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, mercy isn't weakness. I didn't do it for him, Jalen replied. I did it so I could walk forward without looking back. Maurice smiled. Then you're freer than most tenured faculty I've ever met. They clinked cups. The email landed an hour later. Subject: formal statement by Dr. Peter Landon. It began. To the Ashbridge community and the wider academic world, I offer a statement of accountability. It ended. May Jalen Cross's name be remembered longer than mine. And rightly so. As Jalen closed his laptop, another notification pinged. A calendar request from the National Mathematics Council. Title: Keynote Address Proposal, Equity and Excellence in Modern Mathematics. The years had passed like pages in a fast-turning book. Ashbridge looked the same in many ways. The ivy still curled around the arches. The lecture halls still echoed with caffeine-fueled debates. And the bell tower still chimed every hour like clockwork discipline. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The math department now bore different names on its plaques. A new wing had opened. The Cross-Dillon Center for Equity in Quantitative Studies. Its mission was bold and plainly stated: to make math accessible, accountable, and affirming for all. In Jalen Cross, no longer a student, no longer an anomaly, was walking across the campus lawn, faculty ID swinging from his lanyard. At 28, he was the youngest full professor in Ashbridge history. His hair was cropped shorter now, flecked with a wisdom far beyond his years. His stride carried both memory and purpose. And today, for the first time, he wasn't heading into a classroom to prove himself. He was going to teach. Inside the new Cross-Dillon wing, room 4A was already filling with students. Some were first-years who'd only heard rumors of the man who'd once rewritten a decathlon in real time. Others were juniors who'd watched his TEDx talk on equity and innovation. Still others simply saw a class taught by someone whose story had cracked open the gates of academia. They whispered as he entered, "He's really teaching it? I thought he was still doing national keynotes. He chose this school? That's wild." Jalen set his bag down. He looked out at the room full of curious eyes, some expectant, some skeptical, all waiting. He didn't pick up a marker right away. Instead, he sat on the edge of the desk. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to tell you a story." He told them about the first day he walked into this university. About the professor who gave him an impossible question. About the janitor who gave him an impossible answer. About the truth that nearly got buried. And the moment it broke free, he didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. The room was silent. When he finished, he finally stood. Math is a language, he said, but too often, only certain people get handed the dictionary. He picked up the marker, wrote a single equation on the board, then turned back to the room with a smile. Now, he said, who wants an impossible question? But that wasn't the end. Later that semester, during office hours, a student came to him nervous, book in hand, clearly on the edge of tears. I don't think I belong here, she said. Everyone else seems like they've known this their whole life. Jalen leaned forward. I used to feel that way every single day, he said. The student blinked. I almost quit, he admitted. But someone handed me a book, and a second chance. Now I'm handing both to you. She didn't respond. She just nodded, shoulders slightly straighter as she left the room. It happened again a week later. Then again. Word spread. Jalen wasn't just teaching equations. He was dismantling the gatekeeping behind them. He invited guest speakers, activists, underrepresented mathematicians, data scientists solving real-world inequalities. He introduced texts that weren't on traditional syllabi, papers by forgotten Black theorists, female pioneers, indigenous problem solvers. And every time someone tried to reduce his course to diversity math, he invited them to the board and challenged them to solve. Not one ever returned twice. Maurice visited the new wing once a month. He refused to take a title or salary. Said his legacy was in the students. I don't need credit, he told Jalen one afternoon. I just want to sit in the back and see the math finally become what it always could have been. By then, the scholarship program had already funded over 50 students. The first graduate wrote her thesis on the intersection of social justice and statistical modeling, and cited both Jalen and Maurice as foundational mentors. Jalen kept a framed copy in his office. And across the country, other universities started asking, who else have we overlooked? What minds have we dismissed because they didn't look like what we expected genius to be? The cross effect, they called it. A term Jalen quietly despised, but one he understood, not for vanity, but because names matter when systems are designed to forget them. In his final lecture of the year, Jalen stood before a packed auditorium. Alumni had returned. Faculty filled the back row. Even the president of the university sat quietly in the third row, notebook in hand. Jalen scanned the room, his eyes pausing on the seat where he once sat in silence, humiliated for daring to answer. I was given an impossible question once, he began. A few students smiled. They knew the story. But I've learned something since then, he continued. The real question wasn't on the board. It was in the eyes of those watching, asking, will he fold? He walked across the stage slowly. Every one of you will be handed an impossible question in your life. It won't always come with numbers. Sometimes it'll come with silence, with stares, with doors that don't open. He paused. When it does, don't just solve it. Redefine it. And with that, he turned to the board one last time, wrote a new equation. And beneath it, equity is not an exception. It's a formula. Some stories aren't just about math or school. They're about who's allowed to belong. If this moment hits you, if you've ever been overlooked, doubted, or silenced, don't let voices like Jalen's fade again. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no color. Subscribe if this broke your heart.